at that time, I'm 15 years old, and by that time, I'd lived quite a bit of life. I grew up in Southern California, and my parents went through a really nasty divorce. I got through a custody battle. I wound up getting bounced from house to house to house. Ultimately, my mom wound up with full custody. She allowed me to go live with my dad and stepmom in Northern California, in the wine country, a place called Sonoma. My dad and I were always very close, probably closer than my mom and I. My dad's very outdoorsy. He was a pilot. He flew fighters in Vietnam. He was just kind of always my idol. And I lived with him and my brand new stepmom, who had never had kids, was very young, 29 years old. I lived with them for about a year. And, I was 13 and I wasn't really into punk rock yet, but I was just getting into skateboarding and I was 13. And so I was not an easy kid. Really, she would ask me to do chores, and like any kid, I would do them for 5 minutes and, slack off or whatever. And she had never had kids. So after about a year, she just got fed up. And their answer to having kind of this difficult time with me, and honestly, looking back, it really could not have been that difficult in the grand scope of all the teenagers I've known in my life. I was actually a really easy teenager, but they had had enough. And so they sat me down and said, look, you can't live here anymore. Your mom has full custody. So they had me call my mom because my dad and mom won't talk. And so Mom said, I live in this tiny condo. I don't have room for you. Why don't you fly to Texas and live with your uncle? So that was their solution. So I literally the next day, my dad put me on a plane. I flew to Dallas. I'd only been there once or twice. And I began living with my aunt and uncle and their 2 daughters. After about a year, they were very extremely religious, church 5 times a week. The daughters had never obviously lived with a boy, like suddenly being given a 13-year-old teenage brother. That's hard. And so after about a year, they were like, you know what, this arrangement's not really working. So maybe we could find somewhere else for Banning to live. And I had a lot of relatives in Dallas. So I moved in with another aunt and uncle who did not have kids living with them. And my mom wound up leaving California and flying to Dallas. And we lived in the room above my aunt and uncle's garage, my mom and I. And I grew up really affluent. And suddenly here I am sharing basically a flat with no walls with my mom as a 13-year-old boy. But it felt like maybe a place I could grow some roots. Like I wasn't being bounced around. Like the custody battle seemed to have come to an end. I'd fallen even more deeply in love with skateboarding. I discovered punk rock. I'll never forget that day. I was like sitting in an alley in wintertime and a kid introduced me to Minor Threat. And my whole life changed. Like just the first chords of that song rang out in the earphones of that kid's Walkman, and my life forever changed. So yeah, I had a girlfriend, I had friends, and I think it wasn't the life I wanted, but it was a life, and it wasn't terrible. My girlfriend was really sweet and pretty, and my friends were good people, and my mom and I ultimately wound up, she got a townhouse and we lived together. I'd rather be back in California. I miss my dad, but he doesn't seem to want me. So I guess I'll just make do with this. And it was like getting it, it was like sitting down at a restaurant, ordering something and being brought something else. And you're like, you know what? Okay, I'll just go ahead and eat this. It's not what I wanted. And that's kind of where I was. It wasn't the life I wanted, but it was a life. My life is so complicated and convoluted that it's sometimes difficult for me to introduce some important facts in the story. But, when I was 13, my parents abandoned me at an airport, and my mom legally was obligated to pick me up. And so by that time, a year after that, it's like, okay, mom's taking me back in, I've got friends, I've got a girlfriend, I'm skateboarding, I'm making like C's in school. I will say that probably the biggest single thing I was struggling with was the belief that I was lovable or likable. My parents had sort of damaged that belief in me because they didn't seem to want me. And when your parents don't want you as a kid, it creates this massive sense of doubt. Like, is something wrong with me? Am I not likable? Like, will other people not like me because my parents don't like me? And it creates a lot of complications too socially, because it's like, how am I going to, I can't hang out with my friends at my house because my house consists of a bedroom above my aunt and uncle's garage. So you begin to develop sort of, there's a couple ways around it. You can develop a facade. You can lie about it. You can keep people at a distance, and you can kind of create this facade around your life, sort of like window dressing. And that's kind of what I did. Is I just sort of kept people at a distance emotionally, and my parents having left me at the airport really played a big role in that, because after that event, I kind of began to believe that I wasn't really a very likable person. And so that forever casts this sort of doubt over anybody who likes me. Anybody, I had, the prettiest girl in school liked me. And I was like, is this like a joke? Like, am I being set up to like be laughed at? Cause it's middle school, it's a hard time. And my belief in myself had eroded. And because of that, I began searching for other ways to find it. And punk rock played a big role in that. Being a good skateboarder played a big role in that. But I was, for lack of a better term, wounded. And even though I was like, this is a life and I'm willing to live it, I was developing, for lack of a better term, kind of an infection, because I looked superficially okay, but underneath the surface, I was really hurt. And nobody had really addressed that. And I wasn't savvy, I'm 13, 14, 15. I'm not emotionally savvy enough to communicate what I need to get my needs met in that way. So I think in some sense, I really did need help. Like I really did need somebody to reach out and give me a hand. Was it psychiatric? Or I don't think so. I don't think certainly didn't need what I got, but I needed stability. I needed friendships. I needed love. And I wasn't really getting a whole lot of that, especially from my family. And so I think there were people in my life who did have a genuine concern about my happiness and my well-being, which I think in many ways makes the hospital even more egregious, like even more terrible, because there were people there, maybe even including myself, who needed help. And what we got was absolutely not help. I had like I said, a handful of friends. I was really into skating. My best friend at the time broke his board, like the deck of his board. And of course, most skaters at the time, you have 2 or 3 boards lying around with some loose trucks in your closet and wheels and bearings. And like at any given time, you could probably build like 3 or 4 kind of raggedy boards. And so he broke this deck he had. And so, there had been this deck on sale down at this shop. It was a bike shop that actually sold skateboards. And so I had just been lusting after this thing, and I used his breaking his board as an excuse to buy this deck for myself, and I'll give him my old one. I wanted to make it look like altruism, but there was a little thread of selfishness there because I was so excited to get this Powell Peralta mini Caballero. We go down to the bike shop. I buy the deck. I rebuild my board. I move my trucks and wheels to his board, and we go skating for the night. No big deal. I remember that night so vividly.